Okay, great. Okay, good morning, everyone. I'll call this October 20th meeting of the Select Committee on School Facilities to order. Could we please have a roll call, please?
Senator Hutchings. Senator Cost.
Present.
Senator Landon.
Here.
Senator Rothfuss. Representative Banks.
Here.
Representative Harshman.
Here.
Representative Jennings.
Here.
Representative Walters.
Here.
Vice Chairman Brown.
Here.
Chairman Pappas.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Okay, thank you very much.
Senator
First thing,
Pappas,
housekeeping items, please, everyone silence any devices you may have that could interrupt our proceedings. Also, for those of you who haven't been in this facility before, the restrooms are way down to the end to your right, okay? Outside of that, I don't think we have any other housekeeping items. I do want to just take a moment to thank Albany County District #1 for the tours yesterday. Unfortunately, not too many of us, only 2 of us on the committee could make it. But they were very informative. We visited Slade Elementary. We visited the UW Lab School and then finished off the tour with the new high school that was built here. And I just want to thank everybody who was involved. We had a lot of our staff members that were able to tag along with us, and it was a great tour. So just want to mention that and shout out, give thanks to the this district. Okay, with that, let's head into our agenda. And so the first item on our agenda is the State Construction Department responses to our committee inquiries of September 8th. Director, you have the floor.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and committee. I'd like to have Valerie Hughes, our school administrator, start this up, and then John has some background to add to it also.
Thank you. Ms. Hughes?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Enclosed in the packet is a list of excess square footage. It's first given on a district by district basis, and then it is provided on a building by building basis within each of the school districts. That was one of the items from the September 8th meeting that we mentioned we would go ahead and include. Overall, the discussion this year has really been around whether or not what the relationship is, right, with major maintenance. And overall, I think if there was a change to be suggested or considered here to move from the 115% of allowable or actual, if we were to make a change, I'll give some additional information there for consideration. Up to 145%, if we were to change up to 145%, that would put roughly about 24 districts that would be paid on actual and 24 districts that would be paid on allowable at that point. So anything in between would essentially be a phased approach or a step towards that, and also a step towards paying on actual, if that's what the committee would like to consider. A change to the 145% would be about $12 million per year just for educational building spaces. That does not take into account office or warehouse spaces. So again, if there was an appetite for it to consider to work towards paying on actual, it could be a phased approach within kind of those parameters or whatever the committee would like. I think that, potentially there may be some other considerations here as well, just to give some insight. Overall, the state has provided $453 million in major maintenance since 2017. So since the last assessment was done, and 337 million of that has been spent by the districts overall. In addition to that, the 2016 assessment identified roughly about 180 million in deferred maintenance items or issues in those lowest scoring brackets, which would have been your 1s and 2s. So those that are in poor critical condition, really. And since that time, 35 million has been spent to remedy some of those ones and twos. And in terms of numbers for items, those ones and twos were 1,095 that were identified and 302 have been addressed to date. So I think that overall, whatever consideration there is if there is one to make an adjustment to major maintenance, I think that, potentially those are some pieces of the conversation as well in consideration for how you want to roll this out. And for that, I'll go ahead and stand for any additional questions on this item.
Committee, any questions on that item? I guess not.
Okay.
Please continue.
Okay. Second item is K-12 school facility safety and security. And did you want to say something first, Kim, or us? Okay. Are you coming up here? Okay, all right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Tanya Heitrick, Legislative Service Office, Operations Administrator. In your packet is the memorandum that I prepared dated October 7th. Recall at your last meeting, there were additional questions related to school safety and security and the expenditures regarding that item. And so I would point you to the memo. In the 2014-2019 appropriation for school safety and security, the question was, do the appropriations require expenditure based on the assessment performed in 2015? And the answer to that question is no. We didn't find any law that would support that conclusion. What is required is the commission is required to establish a process to expend the funds to make maximum improvements to students and staff safety and requires the commission to actually approve those expenditures. Also included in the packet is an accounting of the full expenditure or the full appropriated amount, which is 13.95 million. That is also included in your packet. The information on the state construction's website indicates that they utilize the school facility planning process and the major maintenance process for expenditure of these funds as well. There was a policy adopted by the commission on May 9th of 2019. You can find that in your packet as well. That is the mechanism that charged the school facilities department with identifying a process for expenditure of these funds. Additionally, you requested information on major maintenance, and Matt and I worked on that as well. The total amount that could have been expended in the 3 bienniums is approximately $41.5 million. And the exact figure for each biennium is contained on page 3 of the memo. Lastly, I would note that the statute also authorizes under major maintenance expenditure of those funds on site improvements, which include outdoor security features, as well as system improvements, which includes indoor security features. So there is the mechanism, even in existing statute with major maintenance funds, to utilize that to address concerns across the district. I don't know if members have questions regarding this memo or the information that's presented herein.
Committee questions? Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Tanya, thank you for this, for the effort on this. It's very helpful. And I'm probably missing it, but can you help me to understand, does this encompass everything that might have been spent on safety and security? And how would we even find that out? I mean, there's got to have been some major maintenance money expended in various ways out across the the districts, but the way I'm reading this memo, that does not necessarily take in all of those kinds of expenditures, does it not? Can you
Mr.
help?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Landon, you are correct. Potentially districts could have spent $41 million over the course of the last, I think, 6 years on school safety and security. I'm sure the department could pull that information with the records that they have. They have, you know, an exhaustive database of expenditures. But this memo just covers the expenditures appropriated in 2014 and 2019, which totaled 13.95 million. But yes, to your point. And additionally, I think based on those two statutory sites that I just pointed out, they could have expended outside of the 10% that was specifically identified for school safety and security for major maintenance. They could have spent, you know, any portion of their major maintenance on that as well under those two provisions. Matt, do you have any comments?
Oh, it's in the packet.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for that clarification, Tanya. Appreciate it, Matt. Mr. Chairman, I think that's important for us to take down the road with us, the fact that a lot more safety and security expenditures have been made beyond what has been appropriated here. So that
Yes, that's certainly evident, yeah. And I think we do still have a balance of that $3.8 million, right? So,
Mr. Chairman, if I may,
yes,
on the item for Senator Landon that he just requested, that is included within the packet, the 10% security appropriate, or the security, excuse me, the amount of major maintenance is 10% that could be used towards security items. So the accounting for that for the fiscal years that provision or that footnote was included along with the major maintenance appropriation. We've included that accounting in the packet for today.
okay, thank you.
thanks.
Committee, any further questions? Senator Cost?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm noticing that in 18 and 19, there were 4 schools one year and 3 schools or districts the next year in the red. Does that mean they're spending their own money? What does that interpret into?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Cost, at the time that those expenditures were allowed to essentially go into a deficit at that time, there was knowledge or understanding that there was going to be another major maintenance payment that was coming, another quarterly payment. And so it was an allowance that we did make for the districts, given that it would fix itself relatively quickly.
Thank you. Committee, further questions?
Mr. Chairman, just to kind of
Yes.
button up this conversation, of the $41.5 million that was allowed under the past 3 biennia major maintenance allocations, to date, districts have expended 16.5 million. So there's still quite a bit of money that districts can still allocate. That's in addition to the $13.95 million that's been separately appropriated for safety and security projects. So approximately $30 million has been either appropriated or expended specifically for major maintenance. And then there's still that balance of allowable major maintenance funds from those prior 3 biennia major maintenance allocations. Hope that kind of closes that out.
Great, thank you for the explanation.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Landon.
can I ask Matt to just repeat those figures for me real quickly? Thanks.
You bet. Mr. Chairman, Senator Landon, of the $13.95 million that's been appropriated, 10 million has been expended. You have about $3.9 million left. Of the $41.5 million that was allowed for the 10% major maintenance, 16.5 million to date has been expended. And that's what's contained in the department's additional materials on their responses. So the 6 fiscal years that they've accounted for, $16.5 million. So all in to date, about $30 million has been either expended or appropriated specifically for major maintenance. But that still leaves, a balance that could still be expended from their major maintenance allocations.
So we're looking at $15-16 million balance, something like that. Okay, further questions, committee? Okay, thank you. Could we continue on?
Mr. Chair, up next is the update on the Trona County School District Number 1 in Park Elementary. And I'd like Valerie to head into this one. I've also been asked by the audience if we can all get closer to our microphones and speak a little louder, they would appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. As included in your packet, there was a request to come back with what commission action was taken on this particular enhancement at Park Elementary School. As it stands right now, there is no action that the commission needs to take for this enhancement. The enhancement has been provided. The information for the enhancement has been provided to the department. We've recorded that information and we will go ahead and put that together along with other enhancements and bring that to the commission on the regular basis that we are required to do so, for them to consider whether or not something such as this it should be considered part of the adequacy standards. So that's highlighted there, the commission rule that really does apply here. However, I'm open to, I'll stand for any questions on this item as well.
Committee? Okay. I think
Mr. Chair, we're moving quickly. So if
Yes.
you'd like to not break, we can continue into the next item, please.
well, I would like to ask for any public comment on the department's report. So if there's anyone in the public that'd like to comment on this, on any one of the 3 items. Yeah, please come forward. Good morning.
Morning, Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Kim Nelson. I'm from Laramie County School District Number 2. I just have a few comments on the major maintenance, primarily in support of the idea that you might go to 145% on that funding. And the reason I want to bring this forward, I believe that the reports that the department presented for you today is exactly what you requested, but I don't feel like it tells the whole story. In Laramie County 2, we are actually have one of the lower excess square footages in the state. I think there are only 9 districts that have more excess than do we. That said, the amount that's shown for us, and we are on page 7 of your report, so I'll be referring to some of those figures. You can see that in Laramie County School District 2, we have 2 high schools, and both are well under their allowable square footage. In Pine Bluffs, that deficit is somewhat made up by the vocational education building. It's a little confusing to me how they put these figures together, because to me, the voc ed building is part of the high school. It should be included in that square footage, but it's the way they come up with they do the pluses and minuses. That said, Pine Bluffs Elementary or Pine Bluffs High School, that voc ed kind of makes up that deficit. So we're pretty close to what we have for square footage there. But at Burns High School, we have modular buildings plus a voc ed building. They are not physically attached to the high school, therefore they're not included in the square footage of the high school, but they don't begin to make up that deficit between what we're allowed and what's actually on place. So we lose about 12,572 square feet there. That's not included in our computations. Also, not shown at Burns High School is that the district was able to bring funding forward to build an addition of 8,756 square foot. And that is comprised of 3 classrooms and a wrestling room. This is a 3A school. And so that square footage, while clearly within our allowable square footage, has been determined to be an enhancement because the district paid for it rather than the state. And so that's not covered by major maintenance. Similarly, at Pine Bluffs Elementary School, which we built in 2017, the district added 4,235 square feet in order to get the multi-purpose room to a full-sized gymnasium floor. We currently have about 190 kids in that building. It was originally built for 172. I think they now have it listed at being somewhere in the neighborhood of 183 by changes in formulas. But we felt going in that we needed that extra square footage. We knew we did. And again, though, because the district paid for it, not the state, it's listed as an enhancement. Therefore, there's no major maintenance to cover it. I think that's important to know. Districts should be allowed, I believe, to supplement their own building capital costs without being penalized by the calculations within reasonable bounds. I understand that there are some excesses when you go above the standards that there's a price to be paid for that. You have to set aside money to take care of that. I don't feel in our case that we went beyond normal standards to provide classrooms and a wrestling room at a 3A school, or even a full-size gym, although there is not yet in the standard allowance for a full-size gym at an elementary school, unless you manage to do that within the given square feet. In my opinion, that should be changed. Moving forward, so for full disclosure, we're actually funded on 297,000 square feet. That's because they also add in calculations for support buildings. That would be inclusive of administration, transportation, and all of your outbuildings, including all the sports facilities, crow's nest, things like that. Essentially, that brings our district to a truly unfunded 39,688 square feet. So you can see, it looks like we're only 15,000 over. So with 115% allowance for major maintenance, we should be pretty good, but really we're carrying a lot more square footage that is actually shown there. Consideration for square footage in place prior to 2004 with the SFD development of standards and allowances needs to be addressed as well. And I think you've heard that multiple times in the past. Older buildings were not built to the same standards. They often carry a lot of additional excess square footage that we don't allow for now. Wider hallways, bigger classrooms, storage, which is something that we don't seem to get a lot of in the newer buildings. And of all of our 46 buildings, only 15 were built after 2004. And of those, 10 of them are just storage buildings. And those 10 storage buildings are in fact just replacements for aged buildings that were no longer sustainable. So we replaced some storage with additional storage that are newer, but we didn't add square feet at that point. Also not acknowledged in this report is the major maintenance responsibility for all our site work. No calculation that I'm aware of provides an allocation for keeping up the playgrounds, sports fields, sidewalks, paving, irrigation, landscaping, and all the other miscellaneous costs associated with keeping a campus safe, secure, and appealing. There is an O&M allowance in the general fund. Frankly, that takes care of our grounds keeping, the mowing, that kind of thing. But it doesn't pay for sidewalks or keeping up the pavement or any of the other various things that go along with that. Laramie County School District 2 is currently sitting on about 2 years major maintenance calculations. And if you look at that, it looks like, wow, they've got a lot of money sitting there. But recent changes, primarily the quarterly payments and a lack of increase in major maintenance, has gotten us to the part where we feel like we have to have a reserve in place to take care of an almost emergency. A single roof, a single HVAC system would decimate that set aside in a quick season. So I beg that you don't look at the figures and think, wow, they're just sitting on a lot of money and not spending it. I would tell you that 2 years that it's taken us to save that amount of money has been at the cost of preventive maintenance that we normally would have moved forward for, but we put on hold for a couple of years so we could build that up. So in closing, thank you. We encourage the select committee to delve further into the needs of the districts beyond the figures supplied today. Preventative maintenance is key to keeping our facilities and sites in usable condition and must be based upon a complete picture of the square footage and acreages covered, as well as updated analysis for funding. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Ms. Nelson. Any questions, committee? Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a couple of questions. From the standpoint of, we've got allowable square footage and we've got a calculation for what that allowable square footage is. One of the takeaways I got from what you presented was the idea that our allowable square footage calculation in and of itself might have some flaws and inadequacies based on the fact that you feel a substantial amount of your square footage should be contemplated as allowable, a full-size gym, for example, at the elementary school. Do you have a sense of what you would view your allowable square footage as relative to the calculation that we have here?
You know, I wish I had brought my actual square footage. My recollection is that we are carrying about 300,000 in square footage, 315. So this is showing 290. The 315 takes into account all the outbuildings and support buildings that are not shown here. And so you can see that we are allowed 275. And if I remember correctly, I think I told you we were paid 297. So we're still short about 20,000 in major maintenance that you know, I think as for our district, we show that we have been very good, I think, about it, getting rid of as much extra square footage as we could. One of our biggest challenges is the school population has changed a bit, particularly in our smallest school. Our population there is very, very low, but we're in a building that was built in one portion 1987, the other in 1960. We've got a lot more square footage there than we need for those particular students, but I'm stuck trying to maintain it. It's very difficult to lop off a section of a building and costly, or to shut it off and not maintain it, because then you just get all kinds of other issues going on. We have to maintain that which we have. We inherited it from, 50, 60 years ago. Yes, the population has dropped, but that doesn't change the amount of square foot that we actually have on the ground and are responsible for taking care of.
Mr. Chairman, another question, if I may.
Please.
You mentioned that there were a couple of circumstances where local funds were used and therefore they were deemed enhancements. Were those implementations consistent with the adequacy standards? In other words, you were effectively implementing the state adequacy standards at the local level but using local funds. Is that what was taking place?
Particularly at Burns High School, I believe that's the case. There are no restrictions on classrooms. 3A school definitely qualifies for a wrestling room, something we didn't have. But there was no state money forthcoming. So we were able to find funding between grants, donations, and capital savings to put that together. At Pine Bluffs Elementary, that begs a point. I would challenge you to look at any elementary building that has been built in the last 10 years that didn't include a full-size gym. However, it's still not included as a standard. I think it's one of those things. Several years ago, we reviewed standards, and one of the standards that changed was an 8-lane track, which has become very common. And many schools were building them, but not being funded for them. So that was a standard that changed. I think it's time to look at allowing for full site. And I mean, I'm not talking, you've got to have stands, you've got to have bleachers. I'm just talking having a full-sized floor to use, because boy, I tell you what, there isn't a minute of the day that gym floor isn't in use. And to have a full-size floor, I think is, for most schools, depending on the size, of course, probably almost mandatory at this point, and that standard needs to be reviewed. But at the time we built it, it was not a standard. So again, considered an enhancement.
back to the classroom change and the additional classrooms, was that to keep up with increase in enrollment, I assume?
Yes.
So was it consistent with if it had risen on a capacity requirement through our provisions and we did an addition, it would have been fully compliant with what we would have theoretically provided for in that case, in your view? It's just that you didn't want to wait to go through the process for the addition, and so you used internal funds.
It's a
Is that
lengthy
fair?
process.
Correct, yeah.
It's a very lengthy process.
We're well aware of
I
that.
don't know that we'd have gotten funding for necessarily the wrestling room.
Uh-huh.
Because there are so many requests for additional classroom space. That said, also, as regards those classrooms, we were trying to manage, decrease the use of the modulars for student use. And we've tried to make those more for adult office space and get the kids back in the building. In particular, our special education resource room was in a modular, and at that time, we had a child who that was a very bad scenario for them to be outside the main building multiple times a day, going back and forth in an unsecured area. And it was very important to us that we moved that into the main building where we had more control.
Are those leased modulars or are those owned modulars?
Owned, but they've been there for 25, 30 years.
Gotcha. And I believe that's the policy, if I'm not mistaken. If they're owned modulars, then we do provide major maintenance for that square footage pursuant to the calculation. Matt?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Office, all modulars are included. Educational modulars are included in the gross square footage calculation.
So major maintenance would be attributed to a leased modular?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Office, correct.
Oh,
It's
interesting.
included in the educational square footage. Whether it's funded or not depends on if it's exceeding
Right.
the allowable, but
Sure.
it is included.
Okay, interesting. Thank you.
Senator Office, I would point out, though, that in the chart provided, our modulars are listed as excess square feet.
And presumably, that's again based on the fact that the allowable square footage was incorporated into the respective schools, and those are just being categorized that way. I think that's probably how it is, but I'm not entirely sure. Is that the way it is, Ms. Hughes, or is? That was what I was assuming, but I don't know that.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, I believe that there is a portion, I'm sorry, I'm not
Page 7.
I'm not 100% on everything, every
Yeah,
nuance
no,
of the major maintenance
totally
calculation, as
understood.
it is quite lengthy and extensive. However, there is in the calculation, I believe, a certain portion of modular space that is recognized within it, but I believe that, and there's some form of a cap, I believe, in this case, in terms of how this is calculated.
Well, Ms. Hughes, it is my assumption, and so I guess this is worth exploring in case it's not accurate, that for example, on the Pine Bluffs junior high and high school, you have a 115% allowable square footage of 73,683, and then you've got a 0 on the Ag Lab and on the Gym Voc Ed building. It was my assumption that 73,683 was effectively the allowable square footage for the students that would be, so it was ADM capped, and it would be for the students that would be participating at the high school. And so you'd be basically be aggregating that 43,394, 2,505, and the 29,849 would effectively be under the 73,683 umbrella. At least that was what I was taking away. And so for the modulars above, I was expecting that to be those to fall under the 93,937, which I was assuming was an ADM limited calculation. Is that how you would interpret that?
Yes, I do believe so.
Okay. Is that how you intended to be interpreted?
Agreed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And just Superintendent Nelson, thank you. Have appreciated always your input and dialogue with our select committee. To follow up on Senator Rothfuss's question, do you have a path forward by rule or regulation or with the commission that would allow you to make your case for that additional square footage, say in the multipurpose facility? Having spent much of my administrative time late in my career as an athletic director, I know exactly where all the traffic is, and it's in the gymnasium. So just curious, as you sit in the superintendent's chair, do you have a path forward where you can advocate for the inclusion of that additional square footage, regardless of what resources brought it about? I hope that makes sense.
Thank you. I must make a correction. I am not the superintendent for Laramie County 2.
Oh, my
Justin
bad.
Pierantoni is, I am the facilities manager. So I
My
don't want to
mistake.
speak on
Thank you.
behalf of the, Mr. Pierantoni was aware I was there, knew what I was going to speak about, but I'm not he.
I knew
The-
that, and that's my mistake. Mr. Chairman, sorry.
The answer to that is yes. And in fact, after we had the standards changed for the track, we did go back and request that the commission release us from our enhancement on our track because it was an 8-lane track that is now allowable. And so that has been done. I do believe there probably is a pathway at Burns High School at this point. Now that our square footage has our population has caught up with our square footage, I think we have that option and probably will pursue that, that we try and get that enhancement removed because it is 100% that addition was allowable so far as what's within the standards. At Pine Bluffs Elementary, I think that would require a change in the standards to allow a full-size gym at an elementary school. It doesn't specifically say that you can't do it, but they only allow square footage for a multipurpose room, which is about half of a gym, if I'm correct.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Okay, Ms. Heydrich?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Landon, in response to your question, the School Facilities Commission rules and regulations do contemplate that very process that you were just inquiring about, and that's in Chapter 10, Section 4. Yeah, Chapter 10, Section 4. It's a district petition to commission for acknowledgement that an enhancement no longer exceeds the commission's adequacy standards or that it should be incorporated into the commission's adequacy standards.
Co-Chairman Brown?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just so I have an understanding, and I realize people in here can hear me, but maybe not online. What does that take as far as staff time? And I'd like to hear from both sides. I'd like to hear from the school district side as well as the state construction department. What does that look like as far as, hey, we've identified this. This is something that we need to petition. Tell me about your side. And then I'd also like to hear from the school construction department. I'd like to know what it takes to go from there, because to me, it seems like if we've got a system here where we've identified that something's going on, maybe we need to have a solution in place before it goes down that path and we have to waste hours and hours and, dollars worth of time to fix something that could be fixed legislatively. So if I could get both sides, I'd appreciate it.
Representative, I would tell you that I'm not sure I have experience enough to know how long it's going to take me to put together that paperwork. I don't think it's probably excessive. I think we've finally just gotten to the point where we recognize that possibly we have that option. That wasn't necessarily the point today, though. I mean, my point was, I think a lot of school districts are carrying additional square footage that are not currently being covered by major maintenance. That's the point I wanted to make in support of the idea that you might move the formula forward or find other way or change the calculations to include that square footage and acreage in particular, because site costs are very, very high. To repave a parking lot or fix a parking lot can take hundreds of thousands of dollars. And that might be, in our case, as much as 45 to 50% of our annual allocation, and it's going to a parking lot, and then you cringe at that. And so you keep putting it off until it eventually costs more, because now you've got to do underlayment too, if that makes sense. That's where I was headed. But I appreciate your thought there. But I would defer to the department as to what is required and how long it would take to get that enhancement released.
Ms. Hughes.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown. So as Ms. Heitrick explained, there is a process for this. It is outlined within School Facilities Commission rules. It would require some documentation from the district to provide that. In addition to that, it would provide analysis by the department in compiling both of those pieces of information to bring forward to the commission. So in terms of hours, I can't really put a number to it. It would certainly depend upon how much research on both ends of the spectrum. If it's for one item, if it's for 10 items, how deep that history goes there. So apologies, I can't give an exact, but
Okay, thank you. Further questions for Ms. Nelson? Committee? Thank you for your
time.
testimony. We appreciate you being here this morning. Are there any further folks that want to testify for this first 3 bullet points, or all the 3 bullet points that are under the department's responses?
Mr. Chairman, may I clarify one item?
Please.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, to your question earlier, I did get a little clarification in terms of, from my colleagues that helped put this together. So modulars, as Mr. Wilmarth mentioned, are 100% credit for that modular square footage. But the total modular square footage has to be less than or equal to 10% of their total district gross square footage to get the 100%. And then in terms of how this is presented, modulars are included in that top level. So if it's a high school and there's modulars on it, it is included in that number. So.
Okay, thank you. Not seeing any other public comment. And I don't see anyone online. Just want to make sure. Correct. But I'll close public comment on that, and we'll, since we're still ahead of time, we'll go on to, oh, yes, Senator Rothfuss.
I do have a question about the allowable square footage calculations associated with like an elementary school, and I'm the line that caught my eye was the Albin Elementary School with an allowable 115% of 7,700 square feet. I know that's a small school. The adjusted gross square footage is 15,425. Do we have anything that's, I mean, we've got an ADM cap on, or we've got an ADM controller on the size of a school. Is there sort of a minimum school size for allowable square footage as we do for a minimum school size within the funding model where from the school foundation program funding, we have small school size and we have a separate calculation. I guess this is something that hasn't come up before. 7,700 square feet doesn't seem like an awful lot of square feet. And I don't know how many students are currently enrolled in Albin, but I'm assuming that's an ADM limited 7,700. What do we do for small schools and how is that calculated? It's not like you're going to change your school size, you know, when one additional student enrolls or leaves the school, you can't just change the configuration of the school. So it seems like it would be incredibly sensitive to ADM on the smaller schools. And I don't know how we calculate that minimum or how it works down there for very small schools. Can you enlighten me a bit?
Ms. Hughes?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, my understanding is there isn't a separation there.
Thank you. Yeah, Matt?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, for elementary schools, the minimum is 2,915 feet. And then it goes through a formula based upon the size of the school that generates the allowable square footage. The middle schools and the high schools, I don't believe have a minimum, generally because they have many more students. Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I just believe the elementary, I'll clarify in the break for you, but in the formulas I'm looking at, I believe just the elementary school has the has the minimum of 2,915. I can send you the formulas at a break.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that would be handy. And so that would be a one student school would have a 2,915 square foot allowance. Yeah, if you could send me the formula, but if you can do the quick mental math, what does my second student get for an additional square footage? Is that clear from the formula, or is that too complicated to tell me?
Mr. Chairman, it's any school 19 students or less is 2,915 feet at the elementary school level.
Gotcha. Okay, that's how it is. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just real quickly, I wanted to drill down, if I could, on, I think Laramie too brings up a very good point, something we've wrestled with for all my years on the select committee, and that is this inherited property. You know, we had to put guidelines in place, and the fact is we just never have, in my opinion, gotten our arms completely around this idea of inheriting all this space. What are we going to do with all this space? We can't bulldoze every one of those old buildings, some of which have the kind of bones that you've seen the renovations done in Natrona County, for example. We don't want to bulldoze those, but maybe I would be interested in any thoughts the department has, and maybe even Matt would like to weigh in on that. We still have excess square footage out there, but it's not the fault of the districts. Is that correct? And does it bear another look as we go along? Do we have our arms around it? Thank you.
I'll let them answer, but frankly, I believe that, you know, it's a policy choice that the legislature could make about what we do with those pre-2004 or whatever buildings. And I think it's something we should tackle and take care of it, because it's been an ongoing problem. But I'll let anyone answer further if you want. Nope, guess not. Senator
Mr.
Landon.
Chairman, I'll weigh in. Well,
okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Before Matt does, I was just going to say, you know, I could go all the way around the state, but I'm looking over at Representative Jennings, not to pick on the representative, but we've got a beautiful high school up in Sheridan, which to their misfortune was built before the modern times. And it just has a lot of excess square footage, but there's a lot of things we can't do with that. So anyway, I was just interested in any thoughts that you might have, Matt.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Pappas and Senator Landon, I think the information presented at the September meeting showed that majority of the excess square footage is at the time period before the state was responsible for the state facilities. But there are instances where school districts have excess square footage that under new construction. I think the example we gave was Fremont County School District number 21. They have significant excess square footage because the time the building was built was based upon projected enrollment. It never got fulfilled at that level. With regards to the 115%, and you know, that's the that's the calculation allows, you know, the lesser of the 150% or the actual. It's just not your major maintenance formula that utilizes that, but it's also your K-12 operational funding model as well. they're in sync. So if you were to move one of those percentages, you have to think it not only on the major maintenance side, but also on the operational side to have those in sync. It would make sense that your custodial maintenance workers calculation or the square footage being utilized would be, at least in the current school finance system, those two are in sync. Now, I guess you could say, hey, we're going to treat it differently, but there isn't much rationale for that. And so, and the other background is, recall this was scaled back down from 135%, 125%, and 115%. And so we've been at the 115% for some time now, but it used to be 135%. And that was, I think the conversation Senator Landon talked about was there was an initiative to warn districts, hey, eliminate that excess square footage, get it off your books, and start adhering to these newly developed adequacy standards by the commission.
Yes, go ahead, Senator Landon.
And I apologize to the senator. I'll sure let him in just a moment. I've just to follow up on that, Matt, I think that's really the point that I'm throwing out there today for all of us to think about, which I think our districts have done a pretty darn good job of trying to get rid of this square footage. We're dealing with something in Fremont 25 right now, for example. You know, what do you do with a high school that's sitting there that we just haven't been able to get past removing that square footage? So it, as the chairman said, it's probably time for us to think about it, because I think our districts have done maybe as much as they can do in many cases. I'll let the senator jump in, or Mr. Chairman, I guess the director has a thought or two. But
Senator Rothfuss.
I'm going to change things a little bit.
Okay.
Sure, thank you.
Director.
Thank you. So I was encouraged a couple meetings ago when Senator Landon said, you know, we can't forget about the inherited facilities. I wrote that down. I look at that often, because before 1997, the districts did what they needed to do to house what they were doing and where the environment and the economy was saying. We say remove square footage where you can. But what do we do when we can't? And I would like to see if the select committee, and we can run it through the commission, has an appetite that we start next year with bringing back a couple of case studies on some of the inherited facilities that were just at juggernauts. We don't know what to do with. I think of Campbell County. You know, Dennis didn't build that high school at 400,000 square feet, but somebody did. And it's a monolithic building, and you just can't start tearing into that. And there's not enough major maintenance money to throw at that thing. And even renovations, probably $100 million. So what do you do with that thing? You know, we talked before about Plant One that has standalone buildings, but no breezeways in between, and they don't generate capacity. There's a lot of what happened, and now districts are stuck. And I think that whether we have a solution or not, I think we need to put that on the radar, just like a few other districts are going to talk today. We can start it with commission, we can start it with our department, see what our best thinking is on it, and try to move it up and place it before you. If you want to pick off a dollar amount each biennium, that doesn't go to the new and doesn't go to the renovated, it goes to the inherited. We can start something, right? And that would be a suggestion that I would make.
Thank you, Director.
Mr. Chairman, may I add?
Ms. Hughes.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Landon, I would also add that these numbers, in some cases, yes, it is the inherited facilities that is this excess square footage. However, there are in some cases where I'm seeing some of these schools that I've visited, and this representation may not include how they're actually using the space, and whether or not, just because, you know, they don't necessarily have the kids that generate the allowable, which is a factor here in determining the excess, it doesn't mean that they may not be using that space accordingly for the program that they're offering. So I would add that maybe that's something, if we are going to take a look and do a case study, maybe having a school such as that in the mix as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that allowance on the conversation. And I do think that that's a topic that we may want to consider going forward. Some of our duty as a select committee is to make sure that our fellow members of the legislature know and understand some of the nuances of things like major maintenance and allowable square footage and things like that. So it might be worth our while going forward.
And certainly, certainly, I think it's something that needs to change. I mean, in fact, we all agree that we're not even funding all of major maintenance enough. And so to take that portion of it, the inherited facilities out of the mix and add to the funding for those properties or those facilities would be certainly great. And to Ms. Nelson's point about site issues, something we need to look at as well. Okay, Senator Rothfuss.
So along the same concept, the discussion that I wanted to raise was the idea that a percentage just doesn't seem like the right answer anymore. I think that series of percentages from 135, 125, 115 was to apply a pressure to close down unused spaces. And I think it did that to the extent that it was possible to do that. And I think we're probably past the phase where any more good will come of that. We're probably just unnecessarily penalizing. I think it gets to the point now where we have to look at actuals and have a process where we judge whether it's reasonable for a building to be its current size. I mean, we look at that Shoshone High School and we think, what are we going to do? But it is that size, and the roof has a certain number of square feet of roof. And when that roof needs to be replaced, it doesn't check to see how many students were under it. So I think we need an entirely different process than a standard 135%, because you'll have some districts that are relatively right-sized. And if we give them 135% versus those that are very heavily wrong-sized, so you still underfund major maintenance in some locations and overfund it in others, that's not achieving the mission of this committee. So I guess what we need to contemplate moving forward is what is a reasonable process that allows us to move towards right sizing and acknowledging, for example, and again, I'm just, because it was in front of me, that Albin school, I just can't imagine that, it's 15,000 square feet is irrational and that we need to only be funding 7,700 square feet for that school. It just makes sense that I'm going to guess 15,000 is a rational unit there. So I don't know if there's any clear way to do that. One way would be to have an approval process through the commission, where you basically apply and say, there's nothing we can do with this school. This is right sized, and here's a little justification. And then the commission weighs that and basically declares this is allowable square footage. The other is for us to take a more definitive action and define it statutorily, kind of across the board, as an alternative approach to the calculation. I don't know which is correct, which would be more popular, but I think one of those two things probably needs to happen, or maybe some combination thereof, Mr. Chairman.
I agree. I really think it belongs at the commission level. The process we have now is a one size fits all, does not work. It's not, it may have worked to try to do what we were doing. It's not working now. It's counterproductive, actually. And so I agree. I mean, each facility needs to stand on its own basis. The decision needs to be made facility by facility. And I think that's way too much work for a legislative fix. And it needs to, in my opinion, needs to be done at the commission level. So another task for the commission to do, but that's why we have a commission, right? So anyhow, I agree with you. So any other thoughts on that?
Sure.
Senator Land? Oh,
Mr. Chairman, just and then to the co-chairman,
Senator
but I agree that I think our department and our commission, I'd be interested in them taking that up over the next few months and coming back to the select committee with what they think might be a better process. So I'm with you on that. I don't know that we go facility by facility. I'd have to be convinced there, but I do think that there's some room, as Senator Rothfuss said, for some better methodology.
I think I think it has to be done facility by facility. The districts will do it and submit it to the, I mean, the district's going to determine which ones are out of balance first. So that's going to pare down a big amount. They won't turn in a facility that they don't think is wrong. So I don't think we're going to see every facility looked at. It's only the ones that district thinks that, yeah, inherited plus, I mean, you could have an inherited one that fits the guidelines, but so it's not every facility. So, Co-Chairman Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I don't disagree that we've got a flawed system. What I've got is maybe two thoughts on it. Number one is when you talk about a school district that decides to go above and beyond, and then we have these enhancements. Right now, it's pretty cut and dried. If you do an enhancement, you're liable for those major maintenance and everything else associated with it. But then I think it becomes a policy decision for this committee and for the rest of the legislature to determine, is that fair? Is that really what we expect? Do we expect that if we house an additional 2 classrooms in a wrestling room, that this body and the 90 members of the legislature are just going to basically say, we're not going to take care of that. That's on you. And I think that's going to be an inherent policy decision that this body's going to have to make if we decide to go down a different path. So that's one issue. The second issue that I have is really just the understanding of how much money this is going to be. We have a reformed appropriator and we have a current appropriator that I think would look at this with a completely different set of eyes and say, okay, if we've pared down the square footage and we understand that we're at a place where we need to fund what we have to fund, there's going to be a cost associated with that. And make no mistake, this year we're very lucky that we have oil and gas up the way that we do, that we're not going to be in a shortfall for these. But in the future, this is, and just not so recent past, we've had these issues where we've struggled to maintain our schools as is. So I guess maybe I would look at this as it seems like a really good idea when we've got money in the piggy bank, but it's potential pitfall and a potential issue for us to be looking at in the future. Again, not saying that we don't want to take care of our schools. I'm the first one that said before we build it, we should be taking care of it. So asset preservation is number one. So kind of my 2 cents, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Rothfuss.
I wanted to respond to those 2 points, and they're both really thoughtful points that we need to consider. With regard to the enhancement space concepts, I think there are really 2 different phases that you've mentioned that we can delineate policy separately. Once it's, when it was pre-state design, planning, and construction versus post, you really have 2 entirely different policy sets. And it would be very reasonable for us, for example, to have 2 different policies moving forward based on those time delineations, where maybe the approval process, we focus in the beginning on the pre-buildings. Do we just include in allowable square footage these particular schools that were built prior to statewide management? Yes or no? And that becomes one policy that we could allow. And I think we probably need statutory changes for that. And then post is very separate because of the enhancement concept. And we would have to come up with a different policy on how to deal with that. Not all enhancements are the same. We obviously enhanced a lot for the high school and put some funds together to ensure, for example, that we had maintenance for the pool and other aspects. But at the same time, an enhancement that we heard about earlier that was to build new classrooms, maybe that is something that then generating major maintenance square footage is perfectly reasonable. So there can be 2 different conversations there. And I think it's reasonable that we don't need a one-size-fits-all solution there. Regarding the second point about moving forward into the future, and when the amount of money available goes up, I think it's incumbent upon us to put together a fair and equitable system and then constrain it at the highest level as funds go down. In other words, what's the right amount of funding for the entire fleet? and do that, right? That's what we propose, we put forward, and then we recognize that we might not always be able to fund that, but to create as equitable of a flow as we can. And that gets back to where we are only at 2% right now. We all know that we should be at 2.75%, so we're already overly constrained. If we were to go and had to constrain it further, setting up a proper system, even if we were more expansive in the number of square footage allowed, and constraining as an action back to 1.9% or 1.8% to cost cover that, I think that's still something we should support, because we're at that point more equitably and appropriately covering the square footage of the buildings and recognizing those as two separate concepts. So I think we can do both is the take home there to the good co-chairman.
Okay, thank you. Committee, any further comments on this section? Yes, Senator.
Just a
Lander.
final thought. We do have, an assessment of buildings coming up too. I've been reminded of that, and I'm sure that will speak to the major maintenance going forward, but really a lot of good points made. And I think one of the most important things that I take away from conversations like this is that things today aren't the same as they were 10 years ago. I think we need to be flexible, and we need to look at things the way they are now. And we're always going to have the constraints of the budget process, and we count on our appropriators, Representative Walters and others, to hold in line what, how to make a formula work. But good conversation on this front, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask staff, I believe this is the case, but I believe we would have to have statutory change if we wanted to do something that would allow buildings to be oversized buildings to be included in allowable square footage by action of the commission. I think that would require a statutory revision. Is that true, or is that not true?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, that is correct. Those, thresholds 115, 135, those were included in statute. There is a process under the commission rules and regulations, as I mentioned previously, to have existing square footage designated as educational and appropriate under the adequacy standards. But to your point, if you're gonna, provide funding for actual square footage across the state based on a waiver process of some sort before the commission, that would be a deviation from the current statute.
Yeah. Okay. I know that Mr. Director, I see your mic's on. Did you want to? Do you have a comment?
Did.
Okay.
No, you could see that. Just a couple of comments from the conversation. I like the conversation. I don't think the current system is flawed. I think it did what it needed to do the last 10 years to get to where we are. I think maybe some changes now, and I think it was effective. I just think there's changes, there's things that fall through the cracks. We do need to look at the inherited facilities. I appreciate Senator Rothfuss's comments about and Representative Brown. There's a monetary result of this, but I bet if I could line every district up, because I've heard from a lot of them, they would say, starting with us and then the commission and then you all, you seem to make rules based on when you have money and when you don't. And that's frustrating. Because the rule is the rule. If you can get the cloudy area out, the gray area out, now we at least know. And so we're dealing with some of that. Then we can plan. If we can't plan, then we have to react. If we react, and if it doesn't fit into your system, we keep coming for your microphone. So I think there's that. And there's always going to be the monetary of how we deliver that. But I think the first part is, what does a different system look like, and does it make sense, and how do we get that out there in our off season, so to speak, and have conversations about it and come back with something. And then because it's twofold, I think the system is confusing right now, and if it's confusing to the districts, then they don't know how to implement it, and we don't know how to help them, and then we can fall back on our rules and our statutes. So I've appreciated the conversation that we're having. I think it needs to continue.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to reach out to our members that are online, Representative Harshman and Senator Hutchings. I know I haven't seen a hand go up, but I just wanted to make sure that you had anything that you wanted to share with us. Representative Harshman,
Thank you,
looks
Mr.
like you turned your mic off. On, excuse me. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I appreciate the conversation. There are a lot of differences. And I think that the other question is about component funding. That's part of the solution to this, I think. But I think Ms. Nelson said it. I mean, newer schools now don't have the wide hallways, don't have bigger rooms, and don't have storage. And I think Campbell County with their 83,000, and I've said it before, 83,000 extra square feet. You know, you look at that north hallway. I've said it before. I mean, built by, you know, forefathers. You just can't detach it from the school, and you just don't build hallways that big, that wide anymore. Sheridan High School, you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, and, you know, I think that was built with mineral reclamation money, same kind of money that built the new office building in Casper, and we never build it that big today. So, but again, it's a great school, and we, you know, so I don't know. I think components, but I think this 115 probably is certainly the lower limit. We haven't gone lower, but then we've continued to add a little bit. I think the 15% on components, or excuse me, on enhancements, and the 10% with security, I think are things we've done to kind of get by. And you know, so I think there's a lot to this story, and I think raising this up a little bit is probably not going to hurt. It's going to solve a lot of problems. So, and I agree, Mr. Chairman, your comments on the, you know, the commission should have maybe a little more say in this to deal with some of these issues around the state. So thank you. Appreciate the good conversation.
Okay, thank you. Senator Rothfuss.
The question that we haven't really talked much about over the years, but is there a better way to calculate the amount of major maintenance that should be dedicated to a building? I mean, not all buildings and not all square footage are created equal in terms of their value. I think when you really contemplate this, you're supposed to be doing something like a 2.5% of the value of the building or something along those lines is really what you're targeting. And then we go to square footage instead. And is there a better best practice than, well, how many square feet have you got? And then we're going to cap that with, well, how many students do you have? What does a sophisticated organization elsewhere do? And what are our options for making that determination?
Director.
Mr. Chair, in other states, you look at classroom square footage. And then you are looking at the ancillary, the locker rooms and what else provides. And then there's the total building, you know, to Representative Harshman's comment, if you've been up to Campbell County High, I do believe 2 cars could pass each other in a hallway, maybe pull the mirrors in, maybe not. And that's just dead space. That's not going anywhere. You know, you fire marshal wise, if you tried to turn into something else, you couldn't. And so that's there. And it really skews the numbers. And we have other schools like that too. I've seen elementary schools that do not need a hallway that wide, just 1.5 cars wide, you know. And so you know, our planners are probably listening in, and they probably have a lump in their throat. But if there is a classroom count that our AIM database can look at and see what's going into the classroom first, to the ancillary facility second, and then everything else is what it is, these hallways and things like that, it may tell us something.
Senator Rothfuss.
As we do the process of condition scoring, which we do every few years, it seems that associated with that process, there would almost be the capacity to do a replacement value analysis or something along those lines as a calculation of that. What would be the current replacement cost of this facility if we were to build a new one today? And then a percentage of that as major maintenance, or some other calculation to generate major maintenance from that, would be more sophisticated. I mean, I could build, it gets back to the bus barn concept, although I know those are actually done slightly differently, but it's the idea that I could just have a large number of square feet, but I've basically just got a steel building. And replacing that is very different from replacing the same number of square feet of elementary school or high school. And it seems that as we're getting into a phase where our emphasis is long-term maintenance and preservation of our educational fleet, that we should shift to a far more sophisticated model of major maintenance, not just increasing the funding, but right-sizing the funding based on the asset. So again, this isn't something we have to do right away, but this is something I think we should explore, and maybe in one of our future meetings, and maybe that's next year, for us to get into it, we can dig into this a little bit better and figure out a more thoughtful and appropriate approach for generating that major maintenance funding, instead of just baseline square footage, all square feet are equal, which is obviously not the case. So something to think about. I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts about that. Is that something that maybe we can do moving forward?
Okay, Senator Hutchins, I see you've got your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to comment on your question earlier about myself and Representative Harshman. Being new to the committee, I'm just enjoying the conversation, writing down notes. Hopefully when all is said and done, if I do return to this committee next year, I would like to spend more time with more people, learning more about the square footage, the ADM, the allowable, with Matt and Tanya, to get more information so I can be a better participant in the meeting. But for now, I'm just enjoying the conversation and just wanted to let you know that. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hutchins. Okay, any further comments?
Mr. Chairman,
okay.
Senator Rothfuss, the condition assessment that is underway will be providing us with a lot of data information, such as that you were mentioning in terms of replacement value. In addition to that, because it is a component and system by system assessment throughout each of the buildings, there's roughly about 600 buildings that will be assessed. The data that we are receiving back will have cost estimates associated with those fixes. It will also include for each of those buildings, it'll kind of call out the key findings, if you will. So which items are immediate needs and in what year those should be replaced. It's a 5-year lookout from now. So for those key findings, it'll suggest replacement 2022, 23, 24, 25. In addition to that, we will have information that forecasts out to say if work is not done, what potentially is that cost in the future if you wait 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. So I think that the direction that you're going here, we should have data to go ahead and support consideration for funding on that level.
And with that, Mr. Chair, I'm very excited about the work that Valerie and John and the new consultant are doing in this area. It's also going to arm us. You kind of go full circle with this, and it brings itself back to the facility planning season. And the district suggests they'd like to do this, and we have hard evidence and components and fundings and whatever of higher priorities, and we have that conversation with them. So I think it's going to be informative for the districts. It's going to be informative for the commission and the select, and whatever the new FCI number is, the magic number, the 0.65 number now. I guess I would like to see the districts and the committees focus on the asset preservation part. And if the magic number is 0.30 up to a 0.50, in which work gets done to protect that before it gets too far into 0.55 and 0.6, and now it's a new school remedy, what can we do? Because for every $40 million, pick a number of a new school, I envision the commission and the select committee rolling out an $8 million fix for three key items here, a 10, a 4, and 8, something greater than that 2 million major maintenance, but not a 40 million. And you might get 5 or 6 districts or projects getting something done to restore some key aspect of theirs for every one new school. And I think you will get some bang for the buck. All this data is going to show us that and give us those options on how to do that. And I think the information will be powerful. It will be able to be used in a variety of ways through the commission and the committee.
Okay, thank you. Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, I think the director is exactly right, and something for all of us to remember, that kind of data is going to assist us at the select committee level, but it also is going to back us up when we go forward to our colleagues. And it's going to help us to help them to understand all of the nuances. I can remember when I was a newcomer on this committee, I had no idea what went into taking care of 25 million square feet of fleet out there, 600 buildings. Well, this kind of information, now we will have that along with whatever recommendations we make. And that's what's going to go to appropriation to the governor, to the rest of our colleagues. So thank you.
Agreed. Okay. Any further comments, committee? Okay, so it brings us to the next item, but I think what we'll do is take our break at this point. So we'll let's come back at if we can at 10 after the hour, and we'll visit the commission's annual report. Thank you. Back.